Can anyone name that tune? Who was the band, actually? Def Leppard. That's right, Def Leppard. Why did I choose Def Leppard? I chose them for two reasons. One is my music tastes are still stuck in the 80s. It's true. My wife can't stand it. My kids can't stand it. And second, the second reason I wanted to highlight them is that this band represents a great story of how they managed adversity and uncertainty. And as we think about being great coaches, we learned a lot of great tips from Keenan. As we think about coaching, a lot of it is how do we lead our people in so much uncertainty today? So think about the economy, think about Brexit, think about the presidential elections, think of all the noise that happens with our customers, with M&A, with layoffs, with growth. It's just constant change, constant turmoil is the underpinning of a lot of our sales process. And so Def Leppard, in 1984, their drummer, Rick Allen, who's represented here on the far right, he actually got in a car accident and he lost his arm in a car accident. And what do you do when you're at the height of your pinnacle? You're a rock and roll band, a hard rock band, and you lose your drummer. That's what Def Leppard faced. So what did they do? They didn't replace Rick. What they did instead was they waited for Rick to basically heal. And he did. He recovered, and he learned how to drum with his feet. He learned how to use technology. And Rick Allen today is still drumming with Def Leppard. They're still touring. I just saw them 2 weeks ago. Anyone see them in concert? Great, two people out of the whole group here. So, but anyway, the key thing there is it's amazing what they did by investing in Rick, and they invested in the relationship with Rick, and it paid off. And when we think about relationships, we're sales and marketing leaders. We know how valuable our relationships are with our customers. I don't need to tell you that. But what we don't think about is that some of our best relationships are more fragile than you may think. And so let me tell you a story. So this story starts with this phrase, I'm taking down my number this week. And this is a painful thing to say when you're in sales, but it unfortunately happens. In that, a rep is going to tell you, I'm taking down my number, or a rep may tell you as a manager, or a manager tells a VP, or in my case, I had to tell our C-suite, for example, 2 years ago with an important deal, I'm taking down my number. But I thought you had it forecasted. I thought it was, in the bag. Well, what happened was we thought we had the right relationships, but we actually didn't. And this happens quite frequently. So in this case, we had a multi-million-dollar deal, and we thought we had the right decision maker. The decision maker was saying, I got it, it's in my budget, et cetera. And we had other relationships at this account, and we thought we were in a good shape. Well, it turned out they actually didn't have it. They didn't have as much control as we thought. New people came into the process at the end, and some of our key relationships left. And as a result, we were in a much more fragile place than we thought. And so this unfortunately happens all the time. I'm taking down my number. And when we were so convinced this deal is going to close. So in this kind of uncertainty, what can we learn? How do we coach our reps? Well, one way we can coach them is we can explain the situation about what's happening. Why is this happening? Why is there so much uncertainty? There's a couple mega trends going on, and many of you are very familiar with them. So the first is there's more decision makers than ever in a buying process. And one of the reasons we see this is because there's just more there's more delegation to more decision makers, and we see the emergence of buying committees, et cetera. And this has changed dramatically from the past. Corporate executive board states that there's 5.4 buyers in a B2B buying process. I personally think it's a low number. I'd say maybe that's about accurate for SMB. But for enterprise, it's more like 10.4. I'd even say 20.4 in some of the deals that I've seen. This is a lot of people to get through and to manage. And a few years ago, it may have only been one or two. And you could call the same person and they'd place your orders. But this is far more volatile now. And so if 5.4 is the minimum threshold of people we need to talk to, what do we think our sales reps are doing on an average deal? Well, we're LinkedIn, so there's one way we can measure that, is we can look at the number of connections that a rep has at a certain deal. And it's not a perfect number, but it's a pretty good proxy for what it can represent. So, the question I want to pose to you, what percentage of sales deals in North America are what I would call multi-threaded? Multi-threaded, we're going to define as 5 connections, 5 relationships or more. So, the answer is 9%. That's really low. That's not where we want to be. Only 9% of 5 or more relationships with their customers, as represented on LinkedIn as a proxy. What's more alarming is 65% have 1. 65% have 1 connection. These are your companies. This is the data we have collectively at LinkedIn. That is not a good place to be. That's a fragile place to be. And so it's not only that, but on top of there's more decision makers, there's more budgets. So what else you're seeing is decentralization of purchasing. And so you're seeing different groups now buying different products and services. For example, in IT, you're now seeing a lot of purchases happening in line of business. They're saying more IT is going to be bought in marketing than IT. What do you do if you were single-threaded with that one IT person with most of your deals, and suddenly all this is now moving to lines of business? And it's not just in tech. Take financial services. You're doing commercial banking, similar things may be happening in different functions. So we have far more surface area for our reps to cover than ever. And if that's not more challenging than in the past, add another variable to the mix. Add the fact that there's turnover at your customers. And so we have far more turnover than ever before, as we have a much more mobile workforce that's constantly moving and changing jobs. So a question I want to ask you guys to really think about what this means when you have turnover with decision makers. What is the likelihood of a decision maker leaving their position within a year? Well, the answer is 1 in 5. So that's significant. So if there's already 5 key people in a buying process, that means 1 at least is already out the door within that year. And that may be the person you have the most important relationship, someone you were counting on as an advocate. So this is something that we have to manage. The next thing is it's not just at this level, but what about at the exec level? So at more of a C-suite, who's going to last the longest in their job? This is where we're going to play a little trivia. So who thinks they have the most job safety as a VP of sales? Raise your hand. No one with the numbers raising their hand? Yes. If you're in sales and you have that nervous laugh, you know what I'm talking about. All right, B, who thinks the CMO will last the longest? A couple brave hands there. Someone who got a beer raising their hand, all right. And CTO, a couple hands, and then D, CIO. Okay, and the survey says, you guys were right, you had the CIO. Beats out the others by a little bit. It's also pretty fascinating, VP of sales, I didn't know this, outlast by a few months heads of marketing. But that's not the point. Who's going to survive in their role more than a couple months than the other? The key point of this slide is that the average executive is lasting 2.5 years. What happens when you get a change of an executive? Well, first of all that goodwill, all those relationships all of a sudden evaporate. Then what's the new executive going to do? They're going to bring in their new strategy, they're going to bring in all their people, and you got to almost start all over. And if this is happening at this rate, you can almost guarantee that several of your deals right now that your reps are facing at any given time are facing this issue. And that's one of the reasons why we see, I'm taking down my deal. How many times have we seen that all of a sudden a key person left? But we haven't really thought about that as much as we should in sales. How do we manage that? And it's not just the turnover of your customers. What about the turnover of your reps? So this is something I think you guys all have a lot more data and insight into your own attrition. What we find, we're LinkedIn, so we have this data, is the average sales rep is turning at 1 in 4 every year. about 25% attrition. So that's a lot. And it's not only a lot, it's getting worse. So here we look at turnover by experience or tenure. And look at this, 0 to 5 years experience, 38% turnover. It's a lot of turnover. And then of course it goes down, but it's still elevated. The reason this is a big deal is that, we all have different types of sales forces and so forth, but generally speaking, many of us, most of our hires increasingly are going to be with less experience. They're the ones doing sales dev, inside sales, et cetera. And so you're training them and they're just whipsawing right out. And it's really a big deal. It's costly to run your sales team this way. And Keenan talked about coaching. I mean, some of these are non-regrettable attrition. And to his point, if they're not coachable, it's a good thing. But a lot of them may be avoidable. And it's really expensive. It's not just, for me, it's not even the time and the cost to hire. It's the lost productivity while they're ramping and someone else who has left who was already ramped. That's where this really kicks in. And so this is a very expensive thing when you have the turnover. So what happens when you combine the turnover of your customer and the turnover of your reps? What happens? 40% of our deals are at risk. One relationship between a buyer and a seller, 40% likely one of those two will not be there within a year. We're hanging on by a thread, which is the topic here. So how do we get to a better place? This is not where we want to be. Well, we can look for inspiration to the internet. Yes, the internet. The internet, we need to transform our customer relationships in a similar way the internet transformed the way we communicate and share data. So here's a picture of pre-internet. Many of us here have experienced life before the internet, and some of our reps maybe not. But remember those days? I mean, first of all, I didn't get an email address until after college. I was in my 20s when we started to really get into that. But before then, what was going on was that you would have leased lines between a company wanted to transmit data between each other. And so you'd have basically point-to-point, a leased line. And you know what? It was all great until guess what? One of the nodes broke and you're down. And this happened all the time. Very unreliable point-to-point communication. So unreliable, of course, that it wasn't lost on a lot of people, a lot of governments, defense departments, to build something better. And that's where the internet came in. And the internet is all about fault-tolerant, scalable, where it can't break. So if anything were to go down, what happens? It just reroutes, packet switching technology. And so a lot of us may think, oh, the internet goes down. But when we say the internet goes down, what do we mean? We mean basically like my Wi-Fi is not working. It's the last connection, the last mile. But the backbone never goes down. When's the last time you heard someone say, I can't shop on Amazon for 3 days because the internet backbone is down? When's the last time I can't do my banking transactions because I'm going to wait. Maybe the internet backbone will come up. It doesn't go down because that's the way it was built to. It's redundant. And so what you see is that we have transformed, the internet has transformed the way we communicate. And it gives us inspiration. We need to transform sales in a similar way. So how do we do that? How do we go from a single-threaded world to a multi-threaded world? How do we do that? Social selling can help. It makes sense. Social selling, which is effectively using social networks to build and grow relationships, to grow sales, is built on a network. The internet is a network of networks. Isn't it not a surprise that a social network, which is a network on top of the network of networks, could potentially help us strengthen our relationships with our customers? And that's how social selling can help. And so as us as coaches, and for us to be leaders, we can really help our team by doing two key things. So one is strengthening our relationships through social media with our customers. And second is it can strengthen our relationships with our employees. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through two examples, two social selling heroes who can show us how it's done. And hopefully we get inspiration from them that we can take back to our offices and we can leverage ourselves. So the first story starts with Doug Ruth. He's an account executive at New Voice Media, cloud software player with call center type software. Actually, and I heard Doug may be here today. Is Doug here? Doug is there. Well, that's going to be awkward for you now. Everyone's going to be looking at you. So Doug, the story's about Doug, who I think really emanates what to do here. So the first thing Doug had is he had an account. He was trying to sell into Bazaar Voice. And what's the first step? Well, the first step, hopefully you've got some immediate person that you already had signed up for a lead. Let's say this gentleman here is Jay. Jay, signed up and did a webinar or something. So marketing, tossed something over, an MQL over the board, and Doug has this. The challenge is, as we know, in a world of 5.4 or more, Jay's not enough. So we got to map out and understand who all these other players are. So how does he do that? Well, in the old days, you could buy lead lists, you could try to play the phone game, etc. Today, with technology, with social media, a lot of that is more available. And what you can see here is Doug, in this case, used LinkedIn, used advanced search. LinkedIn is not the only place to do social selling. There's many other avenues that are really important too. But for a professional context, for B2B, it's the bullseye, it's the starting place, and that's where Doug started. And so he did advanced search, and here you can see a screenshot of Sales Navigator, which allows you to do far more advanced search. So we can go in and see by tenure, by experience, who used to work there, function, all these search filters, so we can pinpoint very easily who those key people are. And that's exactly what Doug did. And so Doug here, as you can see, now he's got context of these people. But we're not done yet. We have a lot more work to do. Now we know them, but notice we're still not connected to them. We're still single-threaded. How do we bridge to them? Because you know what? How many times have you heard people like Jay go, I got it, no need for intros, like, worked for me, and you're stuck. It's a very dangerous place to be in sales. And how do we get through that? Well, one way is to leverage your network. And that's exactly what Doug did. So what you can see here is here's two people from Doug's company who basically had relationships at, in this case, the company he was selling into, Bazaar Voice. And he also had two other people here in his network. They may have been from school, they may have been from prior jobs, and he saw through social networking those relationships. And he was in a position to ask for a warm introduction. There's many ways to do it, but many of your reps are not doing this systematically. I've been in this game now for 4 or 5 years. They do not do it. They generally will periodically ask for an intro, but it's not part of their core routine. And that's a mistake. Going in cold or staying single-threaded, not a good way to do it. One way to do it at scale, every deal, is through ways, for example, by the way, and if you get the warm introduction, now you see he's threaded in. One way to do it, for example, is through things like something called Team Link, which is one thing inside of Sales Navigator, which simply just maps your existing company. So a lot of us are not even connected in our own companies. You could do that if you're a small company, maybe you have 20 reps. Great, let's all connect with each other. The problem is when you start getting to larger scale, you've got people coming in and out, and you're just sitting there all day long making connections, and then these connections aren't really valuable if you don't have a relationship, and then half of them are gone in a few years. So he came in here, and very quickly, you can see it through Team Link, he saw people he knew in common. And this is a really big deal because right now, this is the #1 source of leads for my group above marketing. And if you think about it, it makes sense. What's the #1 source of leads for employees when you're hiring? Referrals. So why is our #1 source for hiring referrals essentially your company network, and it's like number 10 for many of you for your sales organizations? So that's one way to bridge that. So now he's got these relationships, but he also needs to stay on top of any job changes at Bazaar Voice. And what you can see here is there's turnover. There was some turnover in Bazaar Voice, and he was alerted to that. And here you can see you got 3 alerts. One individual came into Bizarre Voice, which was helpful, and 2 left. In this case, they went to Quantcast. Valuable information. The good news is because Doug was multi-threaded, he had built these relationships, those people who left didn't leave him exposed. He had built up a solid enough set of relationships that he was able to withstand, essentially, the turnover. And so here you see he closed the deal, which is great. Remember, we talked about a few people had also left Quantcast. So what happened there is Doug followed up because he had that information. He was one of the first people to be able to reach out to them who were already advocates. And it's not a surprise he closed Quantcast right after. Through this kind of work, Doug's been very successful. He's been at Peak Performers Club 3 years in a row. There you can see him in Switzerland. And he's also won numerous other accolades at his company, New Voice Media. Really impressive. But what's perhaps even better about this story is he also expanded his career and he was promoted. And you can see he started as an account executive and he was promoted recently to a regional VP. But this is all consistent with the data that we've had at LinkedIn. I've been talking about this for about 2 years now. We've had data that show those reps who are social selling are far more likely to get promoted. In fact, it's 1.7x more likely to get promoted if you have a high social selling score than if you have a low one. And Doug bears that out. And it's not just that he figured it out, but his leaders at New Voice Media were great coaches, and they realized what he was doing back to best link. Remember we talked about that prior slide, weak link, best link. As a best link, how do we match that and have this happen with the rest of our reps? And they systematically rolled out a social selling program, and it was also led from the top. So great story from Doug from how do you strengthen your relationships. Let's now turn to Amy, SVP at Rovi, now part of TiVo, about how do you use social media to strengthen your relationships with your employees. This is just as important. The first thing that she's done as a great leader and as a great coach, she's opened up her network to her team. One of the reasons we get hired to be in an executive or senior role is because our network, we are here to help our teams. And some leaders are opening up their network. Doesn't mean they make introductions if they don't feel comfortable. But a lot of our senior leaders and executives, they're not on social media and they're missing an opportunity to plug in their team with senior people. She's been doing that for a long time. She used to do it much more in her sales meetings. They'd pick out a computer and they'd start seeing who do we know in common. And now she just does that at scale. And she's constantly generating leads for her team, leading by example. A second thing that she's done is she's sharing content. And what we see here is she wrote a post called the 24-Hour Challenge. And this is essentially a post around, can you go 24 hours without complaining, which is really hard. I haven't been able to do it yet. I'm trying. And this leads into a book that she wrote. Now, she got lots of comments from her people, from her company, external and internal, how it inspired and motivated her. But it's more than just writing posts, because many of us aren't going to have the time to basically write a blog post. But what about just sharing articles and news and making a comment or two? This is something we can all do, and many of us can do a lot better. For example, our CEO, Jeff Weiner, he's not sending daily emails to our company. We just launched 3 major things in India 2 weeks ago. Where did I find out about it? It was in my news feed. And I know what he reads. I'm constantly on top of what he reads. It's just showing up every day in my news feed. And it's very simple. It's not like he's creating content. He may have a 1-2 liner. And this is really important because as an employee, I want to feel connected to my leadership. I want to know what they're reading. I want to see that they're human. I want to know what's important to them. I want them to stop hiding behind a wall, upon a big wall. And so I think the more we share content and the more we can help our team. And of course, the more we want our reps to share content. You know, buyers are increasingly getting information online before they reach out to a seller. They're going to get educated. And guess where? A lot of times it's social media. 75% of B2B buyers are going to social media, as part of their buying process. So let's lead by example and show the way and coach them how to share content. The third thing that Amy's done is investing in social tools. So here we see a rep with a thumbs up. That's a phony photo. Your reps who are cold calling are not like, cool, can't wait. There's always like 1 out of 10 that just love to say, I love cold calling, just to throw a wrench in it. But the reality is, it's a brave face. I've done it, I hate it. I mean, we can do it. But it's increasingly getting harder and harder. For example, I can't remember the last time I've gotten a cold call because I don't have a work phone number. I think I do on somewhere. I have a work line. I never give it out. And I just have my cell phone, and I don't pick up unless it's someone I recognize. That's increasingly the reality a lot of your reps have. Email response rates are dropping. And so I'm not here to talk about the cold call's dead, but it's certainly less and less effective and slowly dying. But it's not like people are stopped buying. So what Amy did is she's invested in tools, not just for her reps, but also for herself, that help her allocate accounts better and get more systematic, and arming her team to be more successful. The more they have better tools, the more productive they are, the more likely they're to be retained, and the more likely they are to want to come to her company. So here's a stat that we see. There's a disproportionate amount of interest from top performers to be armed with top tools than there are lower performers. Why is that? I actually don't have the data underneath to know for sure. My hypothesis is because top salespeople are always adapting and learning with what Keenan said. Why would you not want to have access to data and something that your competitors are not yet using? And they're latching onto these. And this is a big deal to help you retain and grow your talent base. So bringing us home is, if you think about what these two folks have done, they've shown us what it means to be a great leader and a coach in this social selling evolution, from going from a point-to-point world to a networked world. And that is going to bring competitive advantage, not just to them, but also to each of you. Because if you believe this is inevitable, like the internet was inevitable and social selling is inevitable, then it's just a matter of time while you're doing it and your competitors aren't. So this is a call to each of you. This is a great opportunity for you to help lead your teams in this phenomenon. And basically, it's just much better data and insights than we've ever had. So if you'd like more information, please scan your badge. We have quite a bit more materials of this session, as well as other great tips that other great organizations are doing, how they've scaled social selling, and how their leaders are leading in this change. Thank you very much, and you're off to cocktails and wherever you're going. Thank you.